The effects of copper source, tribasic copper chloride or copper sulfate, on growth performance, carcass characteristics, and pen cleanliness in finishing pigs, presented by K.F. Coble. Historically, copper has been added above that in the trace mineral premix, has been shown to improve feed intake and daily gain during the nursery. Tim, we're starting over. The effects of copper source, tribasic copper chloride, or copper sulfate on growth performance, carcass characteristics, and pen cleanliness in finishing pigs, presented by Kyle Coble. Historically, copper has been added above that in the trace mineral premix, has been shown to improve feed intake and daily gain during the nursery and early finishing periods. However, questions do arise on the benefits of feeding copper during the entire finishing period, as past research has suggested that supplementing copper in the early finishing improved average daily gain and feed efficiency only up to approximately 61 kilos, or just in the early finishing period. However, these advantages were not maintained until market weight when continuously supplemented. As producers continue to increase market weights in order to meet packer demand, there is more interest in supplementing minerals that have been suggested to increase performance. Finishing data on a relatively new source of supplemental copper, tribasic copper chloride, is limited. Also, feeding diets that are high in byproduct ingredients as well as supplemental copper are believed to increase manure buildup and wash time. However, there is little data that is available to verify this speculation. So the objective of this study was to determine the effects of tribasic copper chloride or copper sulfate on growth performance, carcass characteristics, and pen cleanliness of finishing pigs. 1,143 pigs were used in a 111-day study and housed in a commercial finishing barn in southwest Minnesota. Pens of pigs were randomly allotted to one of 6 dietary treatments and balanced on average pen weight in a completely randomized design, and each pen contained 25 to 28 pigs with 8 pens per treatment. The 6 dietary treatments consisted of either a corn-soybean meal diet, a high byproduct diet that contained 30% distillers and 15% bakery byproduct, or the high byproduct diet with 75 or 150 parts per million of copper from copper sulfate, or 75 or 150 parts per million of copper from tribasic copper chloride. These diets were fed in 5 phases and contained 20 parts per million of copper from copper sulfate in the trace mineral premix. In the last dietary phase, 10 parts per million of ractopamine hydrochloride was added. Also, these diets were formulated 0.05% below the estimated SID lysine requirement for each dietary phase. As we look at each dietary treatment, the corn-soybean meal diet or the byproduct diet, as previously mentioned, contained 30% distillers and 15% bakery, kept the same consistency throughout. I have here shown the phase 1 and the phase 5 diet, which will be the last phase. As you can see, we added 10 parts per million ractopamine hydrochloride in those diets. And in the table to the right, in the first column we have the phase, and in the second column we have the SID lysine level that we formulated to. And as you can see, in the last phase when we included ractopamine hydrochloride, we did increase the SID lysine in those diets. As we look at the copper analysis, within the rows I have each dietary phase, and in the columns we have each dietary treatment. And these values are very similar to those that we formulated to. And keep in mind, these values would include not only the copper provided by the trace mineral premix, but also the copper provided by the ingredients that we used in diet formulation. Pens of pigs were weighed and feeders were measured approximately every 21 days to determine average daily gain, feed intake, and feed efficiency. And on day 92, the 3 heaviest pigs in each pen were weighed and sold according to standard farm protocol. At the conclusion of the trial, final pen weights were taken and pigs were transported to a commercial packing plant for processing and data collection. The carcass measurements included hot carcass weight, loin depth, back fat, and percent lean. The following day, to complete the pin cleanliness portion of this study, a digital photo of each pin was taken to allow 3 independent observers to score the manure texture in the buildup. This allowed them to assess the pin cleanliness prior to power washing. These scores were averaged to determine a mean score used for analysis. The manure texture was categorized as either firm, medium, or loose, and the buildup was categorized as a positive one for visual buildup or a negative one for no visual buildup. Lastly, a professional power washing crew recorded the wash time for each pin with a stopwatch to determine the difference in wash time between each pin to allow us to further determine the difference in wash time between each treatment. The data was analyzed using the mixed procedure of SAS, with pins serving as the experimental unit, and the main effect of copper source and linear and quadratic effects of copper level were tested, and the results were considered significant at p less than 0.05 and a tendency between p greater than 0.05 but p less than 0.1. As we look at the results, the response criteria is on the vertical axis and the dietary treatments is on the horizontal axis, the corn soy in the light yellow bar, the byproduct in the red bar, pigs fed copper from copper sulfate in the blue bar, and pigs fed tribasic copper chloride in the green bar. As we look here, there's no difference in average daily gain from day 0 to 71, or the early finishing period, between pigs fed the corn soy or the byproduct diet. However, there's a linear increase in average daily gain as we increase the level of supplemented copper. There was no difference in feed efficiency between the corn, soy, and the byproduct diet. However, there was a quadratic reduction in feed efficiency as we increase the level of copper added in the diet. As we look at average daily gain during the late finishing period, from day 71 to 111, again, no difference in average daily gain between pigs fed the byproduct diet or the corn soy diet. And although there was no statistically significance for the main effect of copper, however, as we look at within copper source, tribasic copper chloride tended to increase average daily gain during the late finishing period from 0 to 150 parts per million of copper, with pigs fed 150 parts per million of copper having the highest average daily gain. As we look at feed efficiency during the late finishing period, pigs fed the byproduct diet were less efficient than those fed the corn soy. However, adding in 75 or 150 parts per million of added copper did not impact feed efficiency during the late finishing period. As we look at performance for overall, again, no difference in average daily gain between the corn, soy, and the byproduct diet. However, there's a clear increase in average daily gain when supplementing copper from both tribasic and copper sulfate. Pigs fed the byproduct diet did tend to have an increase in average daily feed intake compared to those fed the corn soy. However, there's a clear increase again in feed intake in pigs supplemented with added copper. This would have been the driving factor for the increase in average daily gain that we saw in the previous slide. Pigs fed the byproduct diet were less efficient overall compared to those fed the corn soy, and there was a linear reduction in feed efficiency as we increase the level of added copper in the diets from day 0 to 111. Now, as you remember, there was no difference in average daily gain between the corn, soy, and the byproduct diet. So as seen here, we would expect no difference in final body weight. However, as we increase the level of added copper in the diet, there's a clear increase in final body weight such that it ranged from 127.5 kilograms to 130 kilograms during the last day of the trial. This also resulted in some unique differences in hot carcass weight. There was no difference in hot carcass weight between the byproduct and the corn soy diet. However, there was a linear increase in hot carcass weight as we increased the level of added copper in the diet, with pigs fed 150 parts per million tribasic copper chloride having the heaviest hot carcass weight. Pigs fed the byproduct diet tended to have a reduction in loin depth compared to those fed the corn soy. However, there was a linear increase in loin depth as we increased the level of added copper in the diet. As we assess the pen cleanliness portion of this trial, as we look at manure texture, remember manure texture was categorized as either 1 firm, 2 medium, or 3 loose. There was no difference in manure texture between either dietary type or adding supplemental copper to the byproduct diet. However, as we look at manure buildup, there's a clear difference between pigs fed the byproduct diet having manure buildup compared to those fed the corn soy diet having no manure buildup. However, copper did not further influence this effect of manure buildup in the pen. Similar differences to the manure buildup were seen in wash time, as pig fed the byproduct diet had almost a 2-fold increase in wash time compared to those fed the corn soy. However, again, copper did not further influence wash time when added to the byproduct diet. To give us an idea of the time period that it would take to wash a typical finisher in the commercial setting that would contain 48 pens and house 1,200 pigs, the wash time difference in hours would be approximately 2 hours difference between between a barn fed the corn soy diet compared to a barn fed the byproduct diet. However, again, here you can see that copper would have no further impact on the amount of wash time to wash a 1,200 head finishing barn. So in conclusion, there were no differences in manure texture among dietary treatments, which suggests that the consistency of the manure was not affected when copper was added to the diet. And wash time was negatively impacted by the diet containing byproducts, but yet again, adding copper to the diet did not influence this wash time. Adding supplemental copper in the form of either copper sulfate or tribasic copper chloride did improve growth during the entire finishing period. However, pigs fed tribasic copper chloride did continue to have increased growth rate in late finishing, especially those fed 150 parts per million tribasic copper chloride. These results led to an increase in final body weight and hot carcass weight for pigs fed added copper. I would like to thank Kansas State and Micronutrients for partial funding of this experiment. Thank you.